the government would have to say something along the lines of, we're returning to a gold standard and we stand ready to buy or sell gold at $30,000 an ounce. And, that's the new price of gold. And so the minute they did that, by the way, the dollar would, the value of the dollar in terms of everything would go down substantially. And inflation would be extremely high on a one-time event, extremely high. But, we would finally return to some form of money that, the dollar would have a gold backing. Gold's going to do fine versus fiat. I mean, I see gold 10,000 easy. I mean, probably much higher, but I can easily see 10,000. I see.
For over 80 years, the US dollar has served as the foundation of the global financial system. Since the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, which established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, it has been central to international trade, a tool of American geopolitical influence, and a symbol of economic stability. At that time, other currencies were pegged to the dollar, and the dollar was pegged to the gold standard. Although the US abandoned the gold standard in the 1970s, the legacy of dollar dominance continues. Lawrence Lepard, a seasoned investment manager, believes the idea of returning to a gold standard is not as far-fetched as it may seem. He points out that if the US were to repeg gold at $30,000 per ounce, it could inject trillions into the Treasury, though even that would barely dent the $37 trillion of federal debt. Still, he argues, such a move would represent a significant shift in restoring faith in the currency system. During Donald Trump's first term, speculation around reinstating the gold standard gained traction. Trump made favorable comments about the idea, calling it wonderful, and surrounded himself with advisors such as Judy Shelton and John Allison, who publicly supported gold-backed money. Since returning to the political scene, Trump has reignited attention on America's gold reserves, particularly the 147 million ounces reportedly stored in Fort Knox. Along with Elon Musk, he has questioned whether all of it remains intact, with Musk even proposing a full audit of the vault. Lepard suggests that if a future president were to revalue gold or issue gold, or Bitcoin-backed bonds, the result would be explosive. With an overwhelming amount of fiat currency in circulation, it would take dramatically higher prices to recalibrate the system, sending gold and Bitcoin soaring. Make sure to tune in for our expert analysis. Don't miss out on future content, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications to stay in the loop. Your support is greatly appreciated.
And there was a gold pool in London in the 60s from 61 to 67 before it blew up. And I think Johnson got conned into sending some of our gold over there to help support the gold pool and didn't get it back and was pissed off. And so it was interesting. Trump and Besant came in and they said, Trump said things like, well, he who has the gold makes the rules. And, we're going to audit Fort Knox. And my guess is what happened is they got read in on this. And then they got read in and said, sir, not all the gold's there.
That's it.
And, yeah, thank you. And so what they've done is they've started bringing gold back, and that's why we saw these big imports out of London, and they're probably trying to replace it. But Besant is definitely a gold guy, and he's a sound money guy, and he's actually a Bitcoin guy too. And I think Trump kind of basically understands it, although I think he takes advice from his advisors. But some interesting data points out there. Andy Schectman said that Judy Shelton told him that she had spoken to Trump, and Trump said, she's proposed a gold-backed Treasury bond, which would be a great thing. That Trump said to her something along the lines of, yeah, maybe Judy, that's something we float in the summer of 26 when we have our 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And so, so there's some thought. I mean, and Besant has said things like, we need another Bretton Woods. He recognizes Triffin's dilemma. We need another Bretton Woods, and if and when we have it, I want to be at the table. So this is within a 4-year window because these guys, may or may not get reelected in 4 years. I mean, so it's clear to me that it's being discussed. This kind of a reset that I'm talking about is being discussed at the highest levels of the administration. Now, whether or not they'll have the political will, the guts, the courage, the ability to pull it off, I don't know. I think they can pull it off. I mean, it's interesting because in theory, all the rules about the monetary system should be controlled by Congress. I mean, that's what the Constitution says, right? Article 1, Section 8, gold and silver can be money, blah, blah, blah. But as a practical matter, presidents have set the rules. I mean, Lincoln just created greenbacks out of thin air, Wilson, signed the Federal Reserve Act and took all the power away from Congress, or Congress passed the act, but Wilson signed it. Roosevelt just stood up one day and grabbed the gold and reset it. Nixon one day just said, hey, guess what? Your foreigners, your gold, your gold or your dollars, we can't exchange them for gold anymore. We're not doing that. So these are all executive actions. So it strikes me as precedent for some kind of an executive action where Trump/Besant say, hey, guess what, guys? We're revaluing gold. or we're revaluing Bitcoin. We're going to start issuing gold-backed bonds, Bitcoin-backed bonds, and we're going to put this whole thing back on a sound money footing. I think that's a very strong possibility. And of course, if it did, if you do any kind of math, there's absolutely no way they could take an action like that without having the price of Bitcoin and the price of gold go multiples higher of where they are right now. I mean, just
Hmm.
multiple because of all the fiat money that's been created. So to balance the two, you've got to have a much larger supply or price, of gold and a much larger price of Bitcoin. Groman has commented that every $4,000 move in the price of gold puts $1 trillion in the TGA, which could be used then to pay down the debt. But the debt's 37 trillion. I mean, that's a great question, and the great difficulty in doing what I'm talking about is knowing what the right number is for both of these. But basically, the government would have to say something along the lines of, we're returning to a gold standard and we stand ready to buy or sell gold at $30,000 an ounce. And, that's the new price of gold. And so the minute they did that, by the way, the dollar would, the value of the dollar in terms of everything would go down substantially. And inflation would be extremely high on a one-time event, extremely high. But, we would finally return to some form of money that, the dollar would have a gold backing, or they could do the same thing with Bitcoin or a Bitcoin backing and say,
Hmm.
the government stands ready to buy or sell Bitcoin at $1 million a coin. I mean, the difficulty is knowing what level is the right level to create trust and to balance the buyers and sellers on both sides of that transaction.
Lawrence Lepard projects that gold could reach $10,000 and Bitcoin as high as 1 million, depending on how aggressively governments continue to print money and expand fiscal policy. Regardless of the exact path, he believes both assets are well positioned to appreciate significantly over time. Although the mainstream narrative suggests that the Federal Reserve has tightened monetary policy in recent quarters, the reality is more nuanced. Since hitting a low in mid-2023, the U.S. money supply has expanded by more than $600 billion. This ongoing growth undermines the perception of genuine restraint in monetary conditions. According to the Rothbard-Salerno True Money Supply metric, the money supply grew by 2.2% year-over-year in April, up from a 1.4% increase in March. Every month, the supply rose by 0.6% from March to April. Over the past 12 months, 8 months have shown positive month-over-month increases, reinforcing the trend of expansion rather than contraction. These recent upticks follow unprecedented monetary stimulus. During the COVID-19 crisis, the Federal Reserve injected nearly $5 trillion into the financial system through quantitative easing alone. That was in addition to almost $4 trillion created during the Great Recession. These figures don't even include the enormous sums generated through credit expansion, spurred by over a decade of zero-interest rate policies. Let's get back to the interview.
We know they have more than they've reported, and the reason we know that is we know what they mine every year, and that only takes you kind of to a little above what they reported. But we also know what they've imported from Switzerland every year because the Swiss have export data that we've seen. So China has a lot more gold than they're saying. Yeah, and central banks are buying gold, and this is because and you really, other than El Salvador, you really don't see any central bank, or very few. I think Bhutan might be doing it, but you don't have any
Czech
major
Republic
country.
was actually like considering it with
Is
the
that right? Oh,
governor.
that's good news. Okay, but
Yeah,
basically, you don't have any central bank buying Bitcoin, or very few central banks buying Bitcoin, and it's just because it's not a proven enough asset class. They're not comfortable with it yet, et cetera. I think that'll change over the next 5 or 10 years. But yes, they go to the tried and true sound money alternative that they can hold on a bearer basis. I think it's interesting. If you've seen more and more central banks saying who have their gold custody somewhere else, I mean, they're like, well, send it back to me, because they recognize that in some kind of a big currency event, possession will be 9/10 of the law. So yeah, the central banks will probably try to reset to gold first. I mean, and I've often said, and Jason Lowery had a book on this thesis, and I think he's right, that the way for the U.S. to remain competitive vis-a-vis China is just to skip the gold step and go right to Bitcoin, because Bitcoin will, in my view, win in the longer term because it's a better form of collateral, and it's got a number of advantages vis-a-vis gold. But I think as a practical matter, when you consider politics and how things work, a lot of countries will gravitate towards gold, and then over time, they'll add Bitcoin, and then eventually Bitcoin will replace gold. But these things take time. They take not months, not years, arguably decades. So gold. I had somebody ask me that I had a Bitcoin say that, well, gold's going to go down in value from here, and I said that it's just I see no scenario under which that happens. None, zero. In fiat terms, I mean, yeah, it's going down in value in Bitcoin terms, sure, but in fiat terms, gold will continue to go up in value. Bitcoin will go up more. So there's a role for both. I mean, I call gold analog sound money and Bitcoin is digital sound money. And we live in a digital world. And that adoption curve is why Bitcoin's going to crush gold's performance. I know a lot of Bitcoiners think gold's just going to disappear tomorrow. And I think they're being, they're not thinking this thing through clearly if they think gold's just going to go away tomorrow. I mean, it's 5,000 years of history. I mean, yeah, it is just a shiny rock. But until Bitcoin came along, it was the base layer of sound money in the world and has been for 5,000 years in terms of protecting one from inflation. I think Bitcoin is going to steal gold's thunder and perform much better than gold and will someday demonetize gold. But I don't think, I mean, we're a long way from that point. In terms of quote unquote the someday, because it's first of all, Bitcoin's got to catch up to gold and that it hasn't done that. And then it's got to push gold down to an insignificant fraction of the total reserves of, risk-free reserves. And it hasn't done that either. So, so gold is going to be a fine place to be, from a lower volatility sound money, perspective, but Bitcoin's going to crush it in terms of performance because you've got the fact that it's sound money. You've got the fact that it can't grow in supply. I mean, that's the other thing. Gold does grow in supply. In 40 years, there'll be twice as much gold on the planet as there is today because we're mining it. And we know the supply of Bitcoin from now until forever. So, Bitcoin's going to crush gold. But that doesn't mean gold's not going to do well nominally versus fiat. Gold's going to do fine versus fiat. I mean, I see gold 10,000 easy. I mean, I probably much higher, but I can easily see 10,000. I see, Bitcoin 1 million easy. Where we go beyond that, I think it has a lot to do with government policy. I mean, who's running the show? How much money are they printing? What are they doing? Are they trying to be fiscally responsible? There are too many moving inputs to know with certainty exactly where it's going to go. And both of those are just estimates on my part. But I'm very, very confident they'll both be higher. They will have higher value in fiat terms, kind of every year going forward.
Few financial systems in history have endured such aggressive monetary experimentation without eventually being recalibrated. As the supply of fiat currency continues its quiet expansion behind headlines of tightening, pressure builds beneath the surface of the global economy. Gold and Bitcoin, once niche hedges, are increasingly seen as lifeboats in a stormy sea of fiscal excess. Speculation around a return to asset-backed money is no longer fringe. It's becoming a serious conversation amid record deficits and vanishing trust. Whether through revaluation, audits, or digital alternatives, the framework of modern finance may be on the verge of a historic rewrite. Could the next great monetary pivot come not through reform, but through the market itself forcing a reckoning on the unchecked expansion of fiat? Share your perspective in the comments section. If the video resonates with you, join our community by subscribing to our channel and enabling notifications with the bell icon. Thank you for being a part of our community.